20 male, had always had an interest in the paranormal. I can still recall wearing out my dad's Ghostbusters VHS tape as a kid. I was transfixed on the paranormal growing up. But it wasn't until my freshman year of high school that I decided that I wanted to be more hands-on with the paranormal. So all through high school, I saved all my money from summer jobs, birthdays, and of course graduation, to buy a van and hit the open road. Hell, I even started my own YouTube channel and can proudly say that my little channel, Paranormal Inquisition, had up to about 600,000 subscribers at that point. I had traveled to a lot of the popular haunted spots: Gettysburg Cemetery in Pennsylvania, Dudleytown in Connecticut, the Lizzie Borden House in Massachusetts. Hell, I even got to check out the Amityville Horror House in New York. I'd pass through state to state, town to town, and check in with the locals about if there was anything that was allegedly haunted in the area. Most of the time I'd get a side-eyed look, but there were a few times the locals would spill on the paranormal goings-on nearby. And let me tell ya, it made some good content when something happened. At least I thought it must have been because, after about 2 years of scraping by, I had finally gotten monetized. So I decided to keep the show going. I had just hit the Winchester House in California, a hotspot for activity, let me tell you, when one of the locals told me about Stage 19A. It was an old, abandoned studio in Hollywood that they had simply boarded up. Apparently, it used to be the home of an old children's show that aired back in the 70s called Rosie's Playtime. It was a typical kid show, kinda similar to Blue's Clues or Barney, but instead starred a clown named Rosie. According to the Californian local I spoke with, after a few episodes, guests on the show began to go missing. And by guests, I mean the children that would randomly be selected to join Rosie on whatever adventure she was going on that episode. After the show was forced to shut down, they tried to clean it up to reuse it. But everyone who went in reported strange goings-on. Children laughing and screaming, things are being moved or thrown, and some have even heard arguments in the studio. However, when they went to investigate it, no one was there. Eventually, the studio shut down 19A, but it was still standing. I remember thanking the man for his time and packed up to head to LA. As I sat in my motel room, after making the 5-hour drive from San Jose to Hollywood, I started to do some digging on the show. There wasn't a whole lot to go on, but from what I found, you could tell it was a cheaply made show. All the images I had managed to scrounge up online showed Rosie as a young woman, about 19 or so, dressed as a clown. She wore a red and white short-sleeved dress that came down to her knees. She also wore black leggings, a black bow tie, and white boots and gloves. She fashioned her blonde hair into pigtails and was usually spotted with a small, old black top hat. She wore simple clown makeup, of course, white painted face, red lipstick with an exaggerated smile, a small red dot on her nose, and black diamonds over her eyes. The local I spoke with had been right about the disappearances. The thing I found truly disturbing, though, was that the police didn't start getting involved until 6 kids had disappeared. Their first suspect was Gordon Daniels, the creator, producer, and director of the show. He also happened to be the father of the star of the show, Rose Daniels, who portrayed the titular Rosie. When they tried to question him at his home, they found him packing his bags. A struggle had ensued, and Gordon was gunned down after he grabbed one of the officers' firearms. They looked throughout the house, but never found the missing children. They also found that Rose's room had been thrown around and most of her clothes were gone. So authorities concluded that she must have been an accomplice and fled the country. From what I could tell, they never found the bodies of the missing children. There was a lot of push from the LAPD to simply close the investigation. I remember finally managing to track down a clip of the show on a subreddit, and being an avid wrestling fan, I recognized the song Rosie opened and closed the show with, as none other than the theme song to the Firefly Funhouse. It was a gimmick about a dark kids entertainer, one I had always been a fan of. It took some digging, but I eventually found the origin of the song. It appears that Gordon had originally written the song for the show and performed it while Rose sang the vocals. After his death, the ownership of the song went to some production company that ended up merging with another company, where it sat until it was re-recorded in 2018. I drove my old van to the outskirts of the studio lot. By the time I managed to climb the fence, it was well past 9 p.m. I looked around in the dark, fearing that my flashlight would draw unwanted attention, until I finally found stage 19A. It was a large white building with a number and letter painted on the side. I took out my lock-picking kit and made short work of the little padlock on the overhead door. After 2 years of being on the road and sneaking into abandoned places, I had become somewhat of an expert. I held the door up just enough so that I could carefully crawl under it and then gently put it down. Now that the illegal act of breaking and entering had been done, I fired up my GoPro Hero 6, took out my handy-dandy flashlight, and began to shoot the opening I had memorized on the drive down. I'm here, on stage 19A, where a popular children's show once aired. The sounds of laughing children once bounced off the walls of this studio on the set of Rosie's Playtime back in the 70s. But with the show now being off the air for nearly 50 years, why are people still reporting the sounds of children? Join me tonight but suddenly, a feminine voice cut me off. It was as quiet as a whisper, but as sharp as a knife. Get out. I rationalized that it was probably just something playing in a different studio. In my experience, the paranormal took some warming up before they made contact. I began walking further into the studio, making sure to light up all the props that had managed to gather cobwebs over time. Get out. The voice rang out again. Leave. The voice had gotten louder and firmer. What's your name, spirit? I had asked. Silence deafened the room for a minute as I eagerly awaited a response. But instead, I only heard the sound of laughter. Children's laughter. At the time, I thought I had hit the jackpot. Ghosts that were eager to make contact. I remember getting jittery with excitement as I made my way down the hallway towards the dressing rooms. I quit. A voice rang out. There was some loud banging coming from the dressing room at the end of the hall. I slowly began to approach it. Hello? I called out. I began to get closer as I heard a man's voice along with the woman's, but he was talking too low. I couldn't hear him at first. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. The woman yelled. As I listened closer, it sounded like the voice who had just told me to leave. This whole thing is over. I finally arrived outside the door of all the commotion. I put my hand on the handle, eager to spring into action, but trying to eavesdrop more on the conversation. It's over when I say it is. The man's voice boomed through the walls of the stage. Out of pure instinct, I flung the door open expecting to walk into an argument. Maybe a homeless couple had set up shop here. But no one was there. I walked into the dressing room, which was an absolute disaster. The place was musty as hell. A vanity was broken on its side, and there was garbage all over the floor. Upon closer inspection, though, it wasn't garbage at all. It was pages of a script. I wiped off some of the dust, revealing a script to an episode of Rosie's Playtime. I continued looking through the papers, being sure that I didn't cut myself on any of the glass that was all over the floor from the vanity, and ended up with a final copy of the script, along with a few kids' drawings of a female clown. They were all of her, holding their hands or playing with them. And since Rosie was an alleged accomplice to these disappearances, it made me eerie to think about it. I looked and found a piece of glass that had old dried lipstick writing on it. Smile more, it read. Funny enough, I saw the same note on the front of the script. I shined the light across the room and noticed an old tan couch. Like everything else, it was covered in dust, but there were stains on it. Smears as if someone had tried to clean something up. I remember noting out loud for the camera, thinking that it might have been blood. This must have been Rosie's dressing room, I thought to myself. As I backed away from the couch, I felt this force knock me back and onto the glass on the floor. I remember hearing laughter and running as I did my best to get to my feet. "You're it." I snapped my flashlight all around, looking for my attacker, but I couldn't find them. Screw this, I thought to myself. None of the ghosts had ever gotten violent with me before. This was way out of my wheelhouse. Ignoring the sharp pain that my back was in, I dashed the door of the studio, and as crazy as it sounds, it wouldn't budge. I kept trying the door, being slowly taunted with more giggling. Another force knocked me right on my back again. The same childlike voice as before repeated, "You're it." I got up, and I ran. I went right into the nearest dressing room and barricaded the door with my own body. My arms were badly scratched up from the glass, and my back was in a lot of pain from the impacted falls. I looked around the room, which appeared to be a children's playroom. Discarded toys lay all around the room, and in the back was a handmade wooden playhouse. The wood was primarily rotted, so much so that the ceiling had even caved in. But something about it called to me. I slowly crawled to it, peeking inside over the collapsed roof. Aside from the expected debris from the roof, I found a brand new rug. I gently moved the playhouse aside, trying my best not to break it any more than it already was. As I lifted the rug, wet cement began to slide down it. It was like someone had just poured it on the floor. I ran my fingers on it. I needed to feel that it was real. And that's when it fell. I mean, a whole glob of cement fell into what I suppose was a giant hole. Shaken, I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it down to where it had fallen. A little girl was sitting down inside this giant hole. She had this fiery red hair and was dressed in what looked like a blue dress. Oddly enough, I didn't even wonder how she had gotten down there or where there was. I just thought she was trapped. "Do you need help?" I asked. I put my flashlight in my mouth, planted one hand firmly on the floor, and reached down to grab her. But as my torso got halfway down the hole, I realized no one was there. Instead, what I found was a large crawl space filled with old children's clothing. Clothing that had been worn out and tattered. Against my better judgment, I craned my neck down a bit more, which is where I saw bones lying in those children's clothes. I jolted backward, back up to the floor. My flashlight dropped out of my mouth and began to roll. I made a dive to grab it before it fell down the hole, but there wasn't a hole anymore. The whole ground was merely cement. The brand new rug I had picked up earlier was now old and moldy, sitting off to the side where I had left it. I began to panic, which is when I heard the giggling in my ear. I looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, there was the little girl. She was dirty and disheveled, bruised, cut, and discolored, and although her face looked as if she had been crying, she laughed when she saw me. "Found me," she giggled. I jolted back and rushed up against the wall. I looked around the room for others, as laughter began to ring out surrounding me. But no one was there, not even the little girl I just saw. "We're it. We're it. We're it." I got to my feet and ran for the door, but just like the door up front, it wouldn't budge. I began to kick and throw my body against the door. I don't know how long I tried, but at some point, I had been banging on the door for so long that I hadn't even noticed that the children stopped laughing. I took a breath and tried the door again, relieved when it finally turned. "Hey, mister," a voice called out behind me. I should have ignored it, but something made me turn my head towards the voice. Standing behind me was this little boy. He was dirty, bruised, cut, discolored, and his face looked as if he had been crying, just as the little girl had been. He was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and had brown hair that was styled into a bowl cut. I didn't say anything to him. He gave me this wide smile. Multiple of his teeth fell to the floor as if they had just been sitting in his mouth. "Run and hide," he whispered. He started to laugh as I threw the door open, and began to run through the main stage. The children laughed as I tried to open the overhead door again, but to no avail. A large red rubber ball had bashed me in the hand. I gripped it in pain and tried to wiggle my fingers, but couldn't. As I watched my broken hand begin to discolor, I heard the children scream at me. Cheater, cheater, pumpkin eater. They continued repeating it as I desperately tried to find a place to hide, settling quickly on diving under what I had surmised to be an old craft services table. I cowered under there and prayed for the first time in my life. I used my good hand to lift the old rotting tablecloth I was hiding behind. I needed to know how close they were. And sure enough, I got my answer. I lifted the tablecloth and came face to face with another little boy. His overall appearance was the same as the others, but he was in overalls and a yellow t-shirt. "Found you," he laughed. The table flew up as if someone had thrown it, giving away my location. "You lose," the little boy yelled. He began to kick and wildly throw punches at me. I tried to fight him off, but eventually, I was overpowered. Though I didn't see them all at first, more children came in and joined him. They were pulling my hair and skin, kicking, punching, and even biting me. I tried to shake them off. Hell, I even swatted at them, but they were persistent. They continued laughing, almost mocking me as they yelled, "You lose," over and over again. I thought I was dead when I heard the music. At first, I didn't recognize it from the ringing in my ears, but eventually, I heard the theme music from Rosie's Playtime. The assault stopped. I looked out to see none other than Rosie herself, standing at the entrance of the hallway that led to the dressing rooms. She was singing, but something wasn't right. This Rosie was something out of a horror film. Her costume was dirty and tattered. Her bow tie drooped around her neck as if it could hide the large gash that was covering her throat. She looked beaten on and discolored. Her face even had a large smile cut into it. Some of the skin had even been removed so that you could actually see some of her teeth and jaw. I looked on in horror as she held out her hand. The pinky finger of the glove looked as if it was missing, revealing her broken finger. She continued to sing the song, slowly getting down onto her knees. She opened up her arms in some kind of invitation, and that was the first time I heard the similarity. This was the same voice that had told me to leave when I first arrived. I watched the children run towards her as she continued to sing. A black liquid protruded from her eyes. It was almost as if she was crying. She wrapped the 6 children in a large group hug as she began to repeat the song. Now was my chance. I picked myself up and staggered towards the main entrance, praying that it opened. But before I could even grab the handle, the door began to open ever so slightly. I looked back to see Rosie, who had just begun the 3rd repeat of the song, but this time it seemed like she was singing to me. I dropped to the ground and painfully rolled out under the door, watching Rosie sing to the children as the overhead door slammed to the ground. I must have passed out shortly after, because the next thing I knew, I was in a hospital room. Apparently, I had crawled towards the guard booth, and he had found me when he went out to do his hourly rounds. The nature of my injuries led the police to believe I had been assaulted by a group of homeless people who were trying to get into one of the studios. My wrist was broken. I had 3 fractured ribs, a dislocated knee, a black eye, multiple cuts, scratches, and bite marks. I thought about explaining what really happened, but not wanting that pesky bee in E-charge or an involuntary hold at the psych ward, I merely told them I didn't remember what happened or how I came to be inside the lot. I had originally planned to release the footage once I was out of the hospital, but that was until a lawyer came to see me. He was a man of average height and weight, with graying blonde hair that had been slicked back tightly. He had to be about 60 or 70 years old. He claimed to work for the studio, who was very sorry to hear about my encounter with vagrants on their lot. They were so apologetic, in fact, they offered me a check. $1 million for my pain and suffering. All I had to do was sign an NDA which stated I was legally never allowed to reveal the studio's name and my camera. I had asked why, but all the lawyer told me was that if the footage leaked out of my assault on studio grounds, it would lead to a load of bad publicity. After all I had been through, I had no interest in continuing with the channel or ghost hunting as a whole. So, I took the money, but as I handed over my camera, which was now cracked and probably broken from my assault, something came over me. I had to tell him about the hole in the dressing room. "They're still there," I blurted out. But the lawyer cut me off. "Mr. Michelson," he assured, "our studio was found to not be at fault with any of the heinous alleged actions of Gordon Daniels, and no evidence of these alleged actions were ever found on our property. Whatever it is that you believe you saw in stage 19A was probably the result of a hallucination caused by a gas leak." He tried to explain. It was the reason we stopped using that particular building. His cover was almost logical. I mean, it made perfect sense. There was only one problem. I never told anyone that I went inside stage 19A. I told him. The lawyer smiled, put my camera in his suit jacket pocket, left the check on my hospital table, and then left without saying a word. That was a little over a year ago, and I haven't been ghost hunting since. I even shut down the channel. With no new content, I was bound to get demonetized at some point. My body eventually healed up, but the psychological effects of my visit to stage 19A remained. I get these panic attacks whenever I hear a child's voice. It had gotten so bad that I stopped going out in public. But the worst part is the dreams. In the hospital, they were frequent. Over time, they began to get less frequent, but never less vivid. The memory of those final moments in stage 19A still haunt me. I can see Rosie holding the group of children close to her, staring at me with her horrific smile as she sang to them. I can still hear her singing, "We're really glad that you're our friend. And this is a friendship that'll never, ever end." Most people remember Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends for being an upbeat cartoon that exemplified childhood creativity. What very few of them realize is that the entire show is based on a fabrication, a childhood that was never meant to be. The original Mac was an incredibly lonely child who had to deal with the sudden divorce of his parents. With an abusive older brother, an absent dad, and a workaholic mom, Mac didn't have anyone to turn to. It was only natural he ended up making an imaginary friend, a friend named Blue. This is where Mac's life diverges from the one you know. Blue was imaginary in the truest sense of the word. He could only be seen and heard by Mac. His mom, let's call her Lauren, didn't think much of it when she saw Mac talking to himself. It was normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, after all. She did, however, think it was strange when Mac still played with Blue after he turned 8. She tried to gently explain to Mac that Blue was just a figment of his mind, but Mac went hysterical as a result. He swore up and down that Blue was a real person who was always by his side, and even cried when his mom wouldn't believe him. She had to eventually drop the subject. Lauren resigned herself to the fact that Mac was possibly developing slower than other children, and that bringing up the subject would only bring unnecessary stress. She told herself that Mac would grow out of this phase within due time. That was until the incidents started happening. One day before Mac returned home from school, Lauren banged her toe against a desk and cursed under her breath. When Mac finally returned, he ran up to her and said with childish glee that Blue told him she said a bad word. He even described her toe hitting the desk. Lauren froze when she heard this. How could Mac have known something he wasn't a witness to? She told herself that Mac was just playing a weird joke on her, and through some stroke of luck, made a story that lined up with what happened. It sounded contrived, but it was the only way she could make sense of it. That was far from the only weird thing to happen in their home. Items would suddenly go missing and pop up in random places. She at first blamed it on Terrence, since he was a perpetual troublemaker, but the incidents still persisted, even when he wasn't home. Sometimes she'd hear the kitchen stool screech and find it where the misplaced items used to be. Lauren could even swear there were times it felt like someone was watching her, even when she was home alone. The final straw happened when Mac was late coming home one day. It was a considerable amount of time past his usual arrival, but he was a no-show. This naturally got Lauren anxious, so she drove to the school to see if Mac was still there. When the teacher told her that Mac had already left, her anxiety only grew. She went driving around the neighborhood, carefully scanning the area for her son. She combed through the area for half an hour, and yet her son was nowhere to be found. Lauren was about to call 911 to report him missing, until she heard a faint ping of his voice. She cocked her head to the left to see a decrepit mansion that looked like it had been burned down in the past. Lauren gasped as she caught a brief image of Mac running past one of the upstairs windows. Her heart pulsed like an alarm bell. Her legs took off running faster than her brain could process. Lauren slammed open the decrepit doors and screamed out for her dear son. "Mac? Mac, please come out." The words came out more like a cough, due to the heavy layer of dust in the air. Lauren wondered why in the hell would Mac be in a dreary place like this of all locations. She stomped up the rotting stairs and took off in the direction she saw Mac. The mansion held dozens upon dozens of different rooms, making the search for her son incredibly vexing. Each door she opened only revealed to Lauren rooms full of discarded toys and furniture. With an undeterred resolve, only a worried mom could have, Lauren pressed onward until she saw him. She finally found her son, Mac, at the bottom of a large hole in the floor, laying motionless on the ground. "Oh God, no. Mac!" Lauren screamed with so much intensity, she was sure the entire neighborhood heard her. Dialing for an ambulance in one hand, she marched back down to the first floor to save Mac. Mac awoke a few hours later at the hospital, much to the relief of Lauren, who had been crying nonstop since his fall. The doctors said that his injuries weren't too serious and would heal up within 2 weeks. When asked why he was there in the first place, Mac said he was playing with Blue and all the other imaginary friends. It was then that Lauren realized her son wasn't just mentally delayed. There was something fundamentally wrong with him. She wanted to scream at Mac that he could have lost his life over a stupid game of pretend, but the head doctor held her back. He was well familiar with cases like this and knew of an institute that could give Mac the help he desperately needed. Lauren was recommended to go to Madame Foster's home for wayward children. It was a mental health facility specially designed to deal with kids who had Mac's unique condition. With no other options, Lauren scheduled a visit there as soon as Mac was fully healed. Lauren was greeted by a red-headed nurse when she admitted Mac in. Her name was Frankie, and she was the granddaughter of the facility's founder. She got along well with Mac, helping him adjust to his new surroundings and performing mental health exercises. Lauren was astonished at how normal Mac was around Frankie. He didn't talk about Blue as often and seemed more grounded in reality. Frankie explained to her that Mac suffered from tulpa syndrome. It was a common disorder among children who come from troubled homes. They would create imaginary friends to help deal with their stress and form intense bonds with them. What made these friends unique was that they were metaphysical beings, meaning that they could have a tangible effect on the world, even though they could only be seen by children with the disease. A child's imagination is incredibly powerful, and their tulpa is no different. It's been noted that tulpas have their own free will and have a tendency to get violent if they feel their owner is in danger. Within Madame Foster's facility, the children could slowly move past their trauma and become less dependent on their imaginary friends, weakening their power until they reverted back to nothing. It was too much for Lauren to even begin to comprehend. Her son had somehow spawned an otherworldly creature into existence through imagination alone. She wanted to laugh in Frankie's face, but her mind wandered back to all those strange events that happened at home. She never could explain why items would go missing and how Mac somehow had knowledge of what she did while home alone. And then there was the matter of the abandoned mansion. She asked Frankie what about the mansion drew Mac to it, and her answer made Lauren's blood chill. The mansion used to belong to a wealthy family of many children. The family would often invite other kids to play in their mansion and host several parties throughout the year. All that fun would come to an end when a flame broke out, tragically ending the lives of almost everyone inside. There was one survivor, a girl whose name was withheld from the media due to her age. She told reporters that her imaginary friend felt like she abandoned it for her human friends, so she set the place ablaze to get her attention. Ever since then, that mansion has been a hotspot of children with Tulpa syndrome. It was like there was a magnetic force compelling them to visit it. Frankie theorized that the friends' lingering feelings of abandonment drew like-minded kids to the property. Hearing it all laid out like that made Lauren question her parenting. Being a single mother, she devoted herself to her job nearly 24/7 to provide for her 2 boys. Her family was financially afloat, but at what cost? Mac often begged her to spend more time with him, and she always brushed him off by reminding him how important it was for her to keep a roof over their heads. There was also the matter of Terrence, who had grown into a complete delinquent due to a lack of supervision. The guilt grappling her heart was immense. Mac was all alone and felt the need to create someone to keep him company. She couldn't help but blame herself for Mac's condition. Lauren knew she had to be there for him. Lauren spent every day she could visiting Mac at Madame Foster's and watch his progress. The road forward was tumultuous at first, but with perseverance and the support of everyone in the facility, Mac was on the path to recovery. He could go for long periods of time without mentioning Blue and seemed to grasp the idea that he was just imaginary. Lauren eagerly awaited the day he could return to a normal life. One day, as she was making her way outside, Lauren felt something trip her and sent her plummeting to the ground. She rubbed her head groggily and picked up a piece of paper placed by her feet. What it read made her heart sink. "Mac doesn't belong to you. Stop trying to take him away from me, before you end up like the others." As you grow up, you become certain about how the world works. Childhood is full of uncertainty, since you don't know the laws that govern physical reality. Everything can plausibly be everything you don't want it to be. That shadow in your bedroom, the outline of a monster awaiting your sleep, the dark space under your bed, the hiding place of long arms which will tear you from your bed to some unknown nightmare land. You outgrow these fears precisely because of your growing understanding of these laws. Why would any creature evolve to hide under children's beds? For one, beds haven't always existed, and why would humans invent beds when such creatures would inevitably be documented? The illusion, the source of the fear, melts away. For me, all that certainty has gone away in the past few weeks. There is something that is watching me from dark corners. It doesn't matter where I go, whether there are people around or not. If there is a door ajar or a part of a room which the light doesn't reach, they are there. They stare at me from hollow eyes, encloaked by darkness. They are unmistakably human-looking, nothing odd, except for their positioning, their ever-presence, and their black eyes. I saw them first the night after a party. A truly unforgettable night. As one often does, after consuming copious amounts of alcohol, I woke up in the middle of the night, desperate for water. Most of the lights were still on in the house, and while slowly navigating the maze of drunk sleeping people, I had nearly reached the bathroom. The door was slightly open. Vaguely illuminated by the moonlight, I, for the first time, saw them. At first I assumed that the bathroom was currently occupied by fellow travelers, also in search of water in a time of need. It was as I grew closer that I began to become unnerved. First, they were all directly facing me, even those who would not have been able to fully see me. This was strange. One, because I had made a painstaking effort not to make any sound in my approach, And second, because people, especially intoxicated people, do not stand that still, nor do they stay that intently fixed on someone without either greeting them or making a joke. It felt like I had intruded on something, and in my state of intoxication, I muttered out a vague apology, and slightly creeped out, decided that my next destination would be the downstairs bathroom. I slowly and carefully made my way down the stairs and then towards the bathroom. As I opened the door, the automatic light flicked on, and I quenched my thirst greedily. Satisfied, I began to make my way upstairs, back to the bed, which I had left behind. On the way, I passed by the bathroom again. They were still there, in the same position, unmoving. I was extremely unnerved at this point, and every hair was raised. The intoxication, now suppressed by my nerves, allowed me to stammer out something in the vein of, "F's sake, get out of there before you give someone a heart attack." There was no response, no reaction, nothing. At this point, I began to feel a little bit pissed off. These people were actively effing with me, and I certainly wasn't in the mood for that, given my exhaustion and the rapid onset of my hangover. I took one step towards them and began to reach out my hand to close the bathroom door, hoping that it would get them to knock off whatever act they were playing. Before I could take a second step, I was stopped in my tracks. The moonlight from the bathroom window glinted off white teeth. I could make out just enough to see gaunt lips pulled into an unnatural smile around the teeth. I took a step back and, in a cowardly fashion, all confidence now lost, took a left turn into the former bedroom, now informal sleeping quarters. As I lay back down on the mattress I had woken up on, I decided that I'd talk to my friend Jake in the morning and inform him that some of his guests had been playing creepy pranks. It took me a long time to get to sleep that night. The next morning, when I woke up, it was already midday, and a good number of the partygoers had already taken off back home. I found Jake in the kitchen, brewing coffee and toasting bread for those fighting off bad hangovers. I told him what had happened the night before, and he listened sympathetically before asking the others if they had had the same experience or had participated. None had. I helped myself to some of the now brewed coffee while the hangover began to recede. As so often happens, I felt the churning of my guts and had a sudden and desperate need for the bathroom. I walked quickly to the downstairs bathroom, which was still open slightly from the night before, and what I saw made me stop in my tracks, all thoughts of relief driven from my mind. Slightly illuminated from the midday sun, but still cloaked in darkness, they stood motionless, facing towards me in a mirror image of the night before. I called Jake over, and as he crossed into the hallway, he held a puzzled expression. He saw nothing and shot me a concerned look. He walked towards the bathroom, figures still inside, and pulled on the door. As the light flicked on, they were gone. He looked back, a deeper concern etched onto his face. He placed his hand on my shoulder and asked if I was all right. I had barely moved since they disappeared, and held what I assumed was a shell-shocked look on my face. He told me to finish my business, and then drink some water and some more coffee. A few hours passed, and as partygoers left, Jake was glued to his laptop, researching whether heavy alcohol consumption could cause hallucinations. His results were inconclusive. After a while, I told him that I was fine, and that it was an amazing party. I also told him that I was glad that I had such a good friend, and that we would have an even better party some other time. A week later, I was still seeing them. They were always indoors, always where the light couldn't quite reach, and always facing me. I'm always one of the last to leave at work, and the morning after the party was no exception. The sun had already dipped under the horizon when I decided that it was time to leave for the day. I had packed up my things and was just passing the security desk when I decided to take a look behind me. Most of the unoccupied rooms had had their lights turned off, and it was only then that I realized that looking out from every doorway, just outside of the light's reach, were the outline of those same figures, all of them facing towards me. My heart caught in my throat, and I made a vague motion to the closest doorway, before choking out, "Do you see that?" to the bored-looking security guard, Larry. Larry took a long time looking up from his phone, but when he did, his expression remained unchanged. "What?" he replied. I shook my head and said, "Never mind," before leaving. I was terrified. No one saw them. What were they? What did they want? A few days later, I received a text from Jake. "I see them." It has been days now, as of writing this. No one has seen Jake. No one knows where he is. And what I received was the last communication since his disappearance. I keep every single light in my apartment on now. It's worked for a while, but I couldn't prepare for what happened an hour ago. There was a blackout. I'm typing this on my laptop, and I'm connected to the internet through my mobile connection. I don't think it will help much, though. They're illuminated by the dim light of my laptop, and they're standing right behind me.